cities were built for and with children, so that families could learn math at the bus stop and develop literacy skills when they visit the supermarket through playful activities. This is the vision of Playful Learning Landscapes. Playful Learning Landscapes is an innovative approach to education that reimagines the urban realm by linking learning science, placemaking, and community values by transforming public spaces like bus stops, supermarkets, and parks into hubs for playful learning. Playful Learning Landscape supports the development of critical skills and caregiver-child connections for all children, but especially those living in underserved neighborhoods. At the same time, Playful Learning Landscapes creates new opportunities for multi-generational interaction and makes cities themselves more livable, vibrant, and beautiful.
Playful Learning Landscapes at Brookings is building momentum and engagement around playful learning in urban areas across the U.S. and abroad through the Playful Learning Landscapes City Network. The network brings together city-level leaders and stakeholders to share best practices, celebrate successes, solve challenges, and inspire a mindset shift to make playful learning in public and shared spaces easier.
I think one powerful way that the Playful Learning Landscapes network has advanced our work here in Santa Ana is by giving us the feeling that we're part of something bigger. So for a city like Santa Ana to see that we're in a collaborative effort with other major cities in the United States like Chicago, Philadelphia, Pittsburgh, as well as international cities like Tel Aviv and Lima. It's really amazing, and it makes us feel like we're contributing to this bigger picture.
Playful Learning Landscapes enables us to pull our resources together and make these incredible installations for children and caregivers. But through that process, there's a lot of richness in the thinking and the reflection and the working together that I think really helps to build community in a very meaningful way.
The thing that gives me the most hope for the Playful Learning Landscapes in Philadelphia to continue to adapt and evolve is our incredible partnerships. We have developed remarkably robust engagements with everybody from foundations to the school district, to the charter schools, to the parochial schools. We bring in those who know the science of playful learning into those design aspects.
One way that the network, being a part of the network, has advanced my work is really by bringing our core partners in what it means to have a playful city together. I think coming out of COVID, that's something that we all need, is this concept of play and fun in our public spaces.
Un reto que creo que debemos enfrentar todos y todas es que el juego no se vea solo como algo exclusivo para niñas y niños, sino que también sea algo para adultos, ¿no? Que yo siempre digo, ¿quién va a salir enfadado de un tobogán? Y creo que tendríamos una vida mucho más alegre si toda la ciudad fuese como un campo de juegos.
I think we all love the opportunity to become members of this international city network. It's not just about bringing this principles or this vision top down, but it's also become bottom up. And what I mean when I say bottom up is that today we have so many parents and young children and caregivers that understand the importance of this time of young children.
As the Playful Learning Landscape City Network continues to grow, we envision a world where park benches, bus stops, and sidewalks are designed to be both beautiful and infused with learning opportunities for children and families. Just imagine what we can do to narrow opportunity gaps, as well as increase social interaction and community cohesion. The possibilities are endless.
Imagine if cities were built for and with children. Good morning, everybody. I'm Helen Hadani, and I'm a fellow here at the Brookings Institution. On behalf of the Playful Learning Landscapes team at Brookings and our colleagues at Playful Learning Landscapes Action Network, it's my pleasure to welcome you, those joining us here in person today and those joining us virtually from around the world, to this joyful celebration of playful learning. I would like to thank the Bernard Van Leer Foundation for their generous support to the Center for Universal Education, which makes the work we do possible. And I would also like to thank Bob and Ann Bass. Bob Bass is a trustee of Brookings and provides generous support to the Bass Center for Transformative Placemaking. This is an event about playful learning, so we're going to start with a quick activity. You may have noticed some signs in the breakfast area. We put these signs up for a very specific reason, which I'm going to get to in a minute. But first, I want to test your coffee knowledge. So let's have some audience participation in this. So which country is the largest coffee producer in the world? Let's yell out any guesses. Colombia, okay. Yeah, that's what I would have thought too. It's actually Brazil. All right. How about, does research show that coffee drinkers live longer? Yes. All right, yes. Everybody wants the answer to be yes, and it is. So that's a good one. All right. And which is the world's top coffee consuming country? I don't know if I heard the right answer. That would be Finland. Okay. All right. So you may have also noticed some prompts inviting you to ask questions of one another, and I hope that you did. We did this as a mini replication of supermarket speak, and we actually did some research while you were enjoying your breakfast. So supermarket speak turned grocery stores in low-income neighborhoods into playful learning spaces using colorful signs to prompt conversation. So you may not have known this, but over the past 10 or so years, we've actually been tracking some conversations at the breakfast table at Brookings events. And you may have guessed that you don't hear a whole lot of conversations going on. Well, today we actually counted 18 conversations that were prompted by our signs. So as you can see, our methodology was very rigorous. But fortunately, the research conducted on the real supermarket speak was indeed much more rigorous and found these stunning results. That caregiver-child conversations increased 33% when signs were on display in grocery stores in low-income neighborhoods compared to when the signs were down. So over the past decade, playful learning landscapes like supermarket speak have embedded learning opportunities in places where families spend time, like bus stops and libraries and parks and laundromats, transforming community spaces into enriched social spaces for children and families. And research findings from these installations and many more provide proof of concept that when public spaces in low-income neighborhoods are designed based on the learning sciences, they can have a transformative impact on how caregivers and children engage. We find ourselves at a very exciting moment as playful learning is gaining wider momentum, and cities around the world are understanding the need to rethink neighborhood investments to enhance health, well-being, and economic opportunity. And as showcased in the video, Brookings is bringing together city-level leaders and stakeholders through our city network to share and learn and inspire each other as we continue to build this momentum around playful learning in urban spaces. So how do we do this? Playful Learning Landscapes uses a three-part equation. The first part of the equation captures how children learn. We know that children and adults learn best when they can be engaged and active in experiences that are meaningful, socially interactive, iterative, and joyful. The second part of the equation captures what children learn. We call these the 6 C's: collaboration, communication, content, critical thinking, creative innovation, and confidence. These are all based in the science of learning and highlighted and emphasized by business executives as important for career development. And the third component captures the voice, value, and culture of communities, of each community through human-centered design. This morning, our first panel, moderated by Sarah Lytle, will focus on this third component of playful learning landscapes, how to center communities in the process of prototyping, designing, and implementing playful learning in public and shared spaces. And our second panel this morning is moderated by Jennifer Vey, who will explore how measurement tools and frameworks are being used to understand how playful learning spaces can help improve the public realm, provide new opportunities for social interaction, and contribute to community cohesion. And we will close out the morning with brief remarks from Kathy Hirsch-Pasek, a senior fellow at Brookings and a professor of psychology at Temple University. I and many others here are lucky to call her our colleague and our friend, and none of this work would be possible without her and Roberta Golenkoff's leadership. Thank you very much.
All right, good morning, everyone. I'm Sarah Lytle, and I'm the Executive Director of Playful Learning Landscapes Action Network, or PLAN. We are a nonprofit dedicated to creating playful learning opportunities for children and families in the places and spaces where they spend time. And we do this by supporting local organizations throughout the process of implementing playful learning landscapes. PLAN is honored to co-host this event today with the Brookings Institution, and I'm excited to bring you our first panel focusing on community engagement and co-design. Playful Learning Landscapes has always been focused on designs that are meaningful and unique to the communities in which they are located. To achieve this, we use a variety of tools and strategies to learn about a particular community's culture and values and to engage communities in the design process. One of PLAN's community engagement tools is a board game that you see pictured here. We worked with Mural Arts Philadelphia to design this game, and you can see that we use prompts from a variety of categories to spark conversation, and also to collect information that will ultimately inform the design of the playful learning installation for that particular community. So, because we practice what we preach, we wanted to make today's panel a little bit more playful. So you'll see some of our questions for our panelists appear in game format, even though they're not actually game cards. So I'm very fortunate to have three panelists here today to play along with me and to talk about how their own communities have approached co-design. I should also note that each of these panelists represents one of the cities in the Brookings City Network. So Valerie Kaufman here is an early childhood education pipeline specialist for Enlace in Chicago, Illinois. Annalise Pesch is a postdoctoral research fellow at Temple University, but she works with partners at the University of California, Irvine on the Playful Learning projects in Santa Ana, California. And then Catherine Vargas is the director of the Department of Parks and Recreation for the city of Pittsburgh. So welcome to you all, and without further ado, let's get started. Okay, so question number one. As we think about engaging the community, I really want to begin with a very basic question. Who is your community? So how have you defined the groups that you are engaging in your project? We can start with you, Valerie.
Thank you. So there are three communities in the Chicago area that have playful learning landscapes. Aurora, which is one of our suburbs of Chicago, North Lawndale, and Little Village. And I have the pleasure of working and serving the community of Little Village. So Little Village is predominantly a Mexican immigrant community, and we serve as the primary port of entry for many immigrants coming to Chicago. So I would say our community is rich in Mexican culture, values, and we're bilingual.
Great. Annalise?
Thanks for the question, Sarah. So in Santa Ana, we're working with a community of predominantly Latin, Spanish-speaking caregivers who are also members of a community organization called SAILI, or the Santa Ana Early Learning Initiative. And I think it's important to bring that up because this community is really special and unique. SAILI is made up of parents, caregivers, community leaders, and agencies in the Santa Ana community who are all invested in improving early learning outcomes for children ages 0 to 9. So they've been fabulous collaborators and co-design partners, and that's just a little bit of where we're coming from in Santa Ana.
Great. Catherine?
Great, thank you. So, from the city perspective, we serve all city residents and visitors to the city of Pittsburgh. But what's unique about Pittsburgh is that we are a city of neighborhoods. And so when we're looking at specific play spaces, we go very local in our engagement process. The specific play space I'm going to talk about today is actually unique in that it's part of a regional park, which means it's a place that we know we see a lot of diverse patrons to, people coming from outside the city and otherwise. So our engagement for this particular process is a little bit different. That said, one thing that the city has been doing, I would say fairly well over the last couple of years, is incorporating the user, young people, children, as a key constituent in planning and as one of our core communities that we are serving. But I would say in Pittsburgh, it's everyone, with the caveat of that we go pretty local when we're talking about a community play space.
Wonderful. Thank you all. So I think you've heard organizations that folks are involved with, different age groups, but I think that definition really grounds us in question number 2, which is exactly how you have engaged people in this process. So what does the community design, co-design process look like? And Annalise, we can start with you.
Sounds good. So our community co-design process in Santa Ana began with several online workshops that we hosted through Zoom, and we had about 50 families that participated in 8 of these workshops. So we did it once a month for about 8 months. It was closer to a year because we had a couple of breaks for the holidays. But families came to these, and we really had offered a space for them to tell us stories about what they did together as families, where they went in the community together, values that were important to them, and we used several activities to figure this out. So we had a Mad Libs activity, which was really fun. So if you've ever seen Mad Libs before, you're filling in the blanks for certain things. So we had, for example, a sentence that said, "I want people in my community to feel blank while engaging with playful learning landscapes." And so this was one of the ways that we figured out what was really important and valuable to them to embed in our designs. We also had them bring pictures from their community, so we wanted to know what spaces were important to them, where they went with their kids, where they gathered with friends and family. So we had a lot of pictures of the park, and the park ended up being one of our central locations that we're going to be redesigning. The other thing we did was we had them do several creative prototyping activities. So we sent home what was called bags of stuff to all of our families. So we mailed them kits that were full of art supplies. So they had cardstock, crayons, colored pencils, markers, just a bunch of fun things that we used when we were doing our workshops, and they were able to just show us, what they wanted to see, what kinds of designs they wanted to see in the PLLs that we were creating. So we took all this information as a team, we met, we refined their ideas, we made renderings, we brought those renderings to them to see what they, if they thought that those reflected what they were telling us, if they had any feedback or input for how we could change it to better reflect what they wanted to see. And then finally, we had a very fun live in-person play test session where we made mock-ups of all of the designs that we were creating. And we had them engage with those with their families, and we also had an opportunity for them to put sticky notes on the wall for any feedback or improvements that they thought could be made to those life-size mock-ups of that. And so then we've taken all of this information, all of this feedback, and all of these input and ideas that they had, and we've mostly finalized at this point what we're going to be putting in, and we're starting our fabrication and installation process.
So a process that doesn't necessarily feel like traditional focus groups, right? I mean, lots of play.
Yes. Yeah, lots of play, lots of engagement.
Wonderful. Thanks. Valerie?
So I think we started off with the traditional focus groups. Our first installation process began in 2019, late 2018. And so we did start with the formal focus groups, sending out surveys, and really quickly we realized this isn't going to work because surveys weren't being sent back. Time was a big thing. And then as we moved into the pandemic, we really had to be creative. So to Annalise's point, really thinking outside the box in terms of focus groups, really thinking about what's going to incentivize folks to come share their knowledge with us. So we did have virtual focus groups, but it was in a game type of format. And then from there, we met individually with parents and community leaders to really listen to what do they think about play to begin with, and how do they play with their kids, and how would they like to see play different in their communities. And so for Little Village, playful learning landscapes is something that I think many parents have seen in other spaces, and so now to bring that to our community has been just, I think, so exciting for them because they see themselves in these spaces because they've informed them through one-on-one conversations, through evaluation. They also helped with translations, and I'll talk a little bit more about that later. But I think having them part of the process from the very beginning, it really transfers a sense of ownership along the way.
Great, and can you tell us what we're seeing here?
Yeah, so we have pictures of two of our outdoor landscapes here. And so our families identified both of these spaces. The two on the outside are from a memorial plaza of a local veteran, Manuel Perez Jr. And this middle picture is the iconic arch in our community that was donated by Mexico. And so these spaces were really important to our community, and I think really represent our culture, and our families naturally gather here. And so to see these spaces come alive with playful learning was really nice.
Wonderful, thank you. And Catherine, you mentioned earlier that you really engaged young people in the process too, so I'd love to hear more about that.
Yeah, so in Pittsburgh, we were challenged with, of course, the pandemic hitting right when this engagement process was starting, but also redesigning a beloved playground in the community. It's one that in the 90s, the community actually came together and built together. So there's a history there, there's a lot of memories there. One of the first things we did is we had people come together to share their memories of the play space. A lot of parents, folks who've lived in the community for a long time, who not only shared it with us in community on site at the playground, but we also, the city developed something called Engage PGH, which was a place where we could put all of our community design processes online for anybody to see and engage with during the pandemic. We didn't have that forum before, and now that we're post-pandemic, we're continuing to use it. But that also means that then those stories get shared more broadly. People could reflect on those memories. So engaging young people then in the process, we did have traditional community meetings, which were on Zoom, which kids would not find fun. So we also had meetups at the play space, and it's in Highland Park, and we had young people design within the same footprint of the park space their own ideas about what should go there. And what was cute is that you can see over here we had like a little legend that was given to young people along with the little play space design area. We got several of these. These are just a couple examples. But we even had young people who created their own legends. Like, this is what I added to this playground, a rocket ship or this. And so it was really cool to be able to engage young people in that way. During the pandemic, having access to families was difficult, but we're lucky to have really great partners. We worked with a group called Trying Together, who is a leader in early childhood education advocacy and collaborating with families and caregivers to help get this out and to help get feedback from young people. We also worked with several schools to do that. And so as a result, what we found is that one key thing that came out of the playground, which you'll see down here is the new designed playground, was the concept that families wanted places that were similar for their kids to play at different ages. So if you were walking through this playground, you could sense just naturally where really little children, very young child would play versus older children, which is a feature that the previous playground did not have, but definitely came through in engaging families in this way. The other thing I wanted to mention real quickly is that this mosaic here was another way for us to figure out how to make sure that families and kids felt just as connected to the build of this playground, even though it wasn't like the 90s where everybody got together and built the playground. And so what you'll see here are these flowers, these little mosaic flowers. Over 200 young people contributed to this sign, and they know exactly which flower is theirs. We have a legend that everybody received. So when we had the opening of the playground, you had families and kids going up to take pictures with this sign. And why that's so important is because the previous playground had that history. This is an example of a memory that was shared. And we wanted to create that same meaning and memories for kids, 20 years from now to come back to this playground as adults and say, that's me, and I participated in this. So.
That's fantastic. Thank you, and thank you all. So a couple of you have mentioned this already, but obviously COVID-19 threw lots of things for a loop, including community engagement processes. So I'd love to hear a little bit more about how you pivoted during that time, both to support the community and also to move projects forward. So Catherine, we'll go right back to you.
Yeah, I alluded to it a little bit. The big challenge was how to effectively engage young people during COVID. The original plan was to be way more active in a couple of the local schools, and we had to shift to our community partnerships to make that happen. We worked with a local community organization called the Highland Park Community Council, which is in the neighborhood in which this playground is located, and they actually formed a playground committee of parents and some young people too, who were more, I would say, actively engaged in some of the background work and getting something like that, drawing out to as many families as we could. We also relied on our key partners who are part of the Playful Learning Landscapes Committee. So I mentioned Trying Together. They have a really large footprint in our community as it relates to early childhood, and they were critical in helping us make sure that we could have the reach that we wanted to have as it related to community input. One of the challenges working at the city is that we spend a lot of our time downtown in a building, not necessarily in the community. So having those key community partners made our engagement successful during COVID especially. I think if we did not have those existing partners, it would have been a lot trickier to get the level of actual community buy-in and feedback that we wanted to have on this project.
Great. I feel like partnerships is going to be a big theme here. Annalise, do you want to talk about Santana?
Sure. Yeah. So partnerships were very important and integral to our success as well during COVID. So we started our co-design process once COVID had hit. So we already were thinking we need to do this some way other than in person. So we were pivoting to Zoom. We were going to use Zoom so we could still offer that human touch to it. We wanted everybody to be able to talk and interact with each other and engage. And our community partnership with SALE, the Santa Ana Early Learning Initiative that I talked about earlier, the community leaders for that organization were just absolutely instrumental in making sure that we were able to reach out to families. So they, reached out to families and told them what we were doing. They asked if they wanted to participate, told them that we were going to be doing this through Zoom, and then gave so much help to families to download Zoom, to access the Zoom link that we had sent to the leaders. So they were really there, like texting families, calling them up, telling them we want you to do this, we'll help you, we'll go door to door and make sure that you know how to get Zoom on your phone and access all of the fun activities that we were going to offer and try to get them engaged with. So I think that was really important and instrumental. The second thing that I think was really important to our success pivoting to Zoom was, again, the fact that we were doing everything in a very engaged manner. So we weren't on Zoom lecturing at anybody. We were on Zoom giving families, first off, physical kits that we mailed home to them that they could use and play with and manipulate. And that was really, I think, important because it gave them something to do. It wasn't like a 2-hour session where they didn't want to be there. They were very engaged. They really thought that what we were doing with them was active, fun. So we really, I think, honed in on the principles of playful learning and tried to embed those into our co-design sessions as well. Yeah.
And do you want to tell us a little bit about these images?
Sure. So these are just showing you some of the success that I think that we had pivoting to Zoom. So again, what you can see here are everybody with their bags of stuff. And so we would give parents about 20 to 30 minutes to just craft. And we gave them some guidelines, like we want you to make something you want to see in your community. We want it to reflect things that are, incorporating the playful learning principles, and think about anything you want your kiddo to learn, some, content or collaboration or, some of those 6E skills. And so parents just created all of this. It was beautiful. And then we would have a share out where we would ask them to show what they had created and tell us what it meant to them and why they wanted to see that infused in some of the designs that we created. And then what I'm showing you here on this picture is just when we were able to pivot to in-person sessions, we did very similar activities. And so you can again see here that we had just all of our community members, all of our families sitting together. We had arts and crafts, we had them playing, showing their designs and telling us stories about what it meant to them.
Great, thank you. Valerie?
So I think family engagement, as I've mentioned before, was integral to our process since the beginning. Our first 2 installations were outdoor installations, and those opened in 2020. And so while it was a little easier to see engagement and to really activate those spaces, we did see really low attendance in those spaces just because our community at one point had the highest rate of positivity. And so we were really encouraging folks to stay home. So it seemed like counterintuitive to say stay home, but come use these spaces. So when we opened our indoor installation, which is at a laundromat, we had to be really creative in thinking about how do we encourage our community to use these spaces in a safe way, because while vaccines had started to roll out, it was still very new, and we wanted to make sure that it didn't feel like a burden to our stakeholder who was allowing us to share this space with him. So that meant, talking out loud about extra sanitizing that needed to happen in this space. What does that even mean? What about masks and sanitizer for families that were coming in and out? And so I think a lot of that was communication, not only with our laundromat owner and staff, but also with our families and hearing from them, what do you need to feel safe to come out and use this space? Because laundry still had to get done. And in many cases, parents were leaving their kids at home. And so we were seeing that spaces where families were once gathering naturally for extended periods of time, that was no longer happening. And so we'll see some pictures soon. We worked with, thank you, our laundromat owner and staff to get them hand sanitizer and masks for adults and children. Here you see, this is our math nook, and so it's right at the entrance, and we really wanted this space to still feel welcoming in spite of the pandemic. And here you see part of our math nook, parents are engaging in sorting and creating patterns. And so we did see some hesitancy in wanting to engage in these spaces, but by having hand sanitizer regularly available and accessible, as well as masks, I think it really encouraged parents to come back as a family to these spaces and really engage with it in meaningful ways.
Fantastic. So I think some good information, not only how you pivoted your process, but also how do you consider that final product and what that space looks like in the era of COVID, right? So given that we've heard so much about the rich data you've collected from your communities, I'm curious now to know how the community engagement process informed that final design. So how do you sort of trace that through line from the data that you collected, what you heard from the community, and then how that ultimately impacted the design? So Valerie, do you want to kick us off?
Yeah, so it was important that these spaces be culturally relevant and reflect our community and the rich culture that we have in our community. So again, going back to our indoor installation, we wanted early math skills to be just oversaturated in this space. And so we worked with the Chicago Children's Museum to identify a local artist and commission a set of 3 murals. And so a committee, along with
parents from the community selected a female artist who had already done a really beautiful mural in our community depicting the Day of the Dead on one of our popular restaurants in the community. And so to have her create a mural for this space was just so, I don't have the words to describe it, but as a Latina, to see myself, you know, in this muralist is just a beautiful experience. And what was great is that we really wanted to make sure that our parents could engage with the mural as well. And so she did a great job in not only depicting our community, but in ensuring that as a parent, you're not going to be bored every time you go to the laundromat, that you're going to see something new in these murals. And not only are you talking about early math skills and practicing them, now you have the opportunity to share memories and stories. And I actually have a picture of one of the murals here. And so the theme of the mural was a summer day in Little Village. And so you can see math is just all over this mural. We have our Sox hat, we have the Chicago Cubs, which of course we had to depict. But I think one of my favorite parts of this specific mural is our paletero, and this little girl in her ruffly dress and ruffle socks and black Mary Janes and braids. And I think every Latina has had that same outfit. And so as a mom, you know, you can go and say, oh my gosh, I was that little girl, and in many cases, you know, if you have your daughter with you, that is also your little girl. So just to have these shared experiences and to be able to depict it in a mural, I think is so special. And I think our community was really proud of the muralist Liz with what she was able to create.
Wonderful, thank you. That's beautiful. I love it. Catherine, do you want to share a little bit about how your community engagement process informed that final design?
Sure, definitely. A couple of important ways. First, again, we were replacing a beloved play space. I mean, people really had have still a lot of feelings about this particular play space. One in particular is that it's a wooden play space. So if you were to go to Pittsburgh and look at sort of our standards for new playgrounds that we've been putting together, or new playground builds, they typically will mirror very similarly what was there previously, but we don't typically use wood. We are using other play material or other, playground material is sort of our standard practice. This community was very specific, like this must be a wooden playground. This has to stay a wooden playground. And so we did that. It shifted a lot about the design that I think that the landscape architect, who's wonderful at the city, who really gets a lot of energy from community engagement, which is helpful for us that we have someone like her on our team. She participates in our Playful Learning Landscapes community, and her leadership, because she is the person leading a lot of these design processes, is important there. But she was energized by the opportunity and challenge of, hey, the community really needs something different for this play space. Let's make sure we can provide that so that it continues with that sort of history of what that playground has meant for the community. The other thing I alluded to before is the concept of understanding which pieces of play equipment are suitable for what ages, and having like zones almost associated with that particular play space. That's not how it was designed previously, but in talking with families about how they use their play spaces, that was important. And I think that was one of the biggest themes, is that while we were talking about design and at the end of the day, what will this look like, we talked a lot about the use of the space. And so one of the cool things that we're working on now with our partner Trying Together is setting up a number of story times. We were very specific about how we would link the stories that we chose to the way that the playground was designed. So there's the playground picture that was up earlier of the final design. There's ships, and it's very whimsical on purpose. So we've been working on book selections with the community, how we would bring people out to use the space more actively, not just as a playground, but also as a gathering space. And that was true of the design as well, and something that the community wanted. And it gives us a reason to continue to come together to talk about this particular space, not as a finished playground, but now as how do we activate it? How does it continue to be the play space that the community really wants it to be? So we're continuing those conversations based off of our our engagement with the community. It doesn't end, I guess I should say. The engagement of the community around this space does not end, which is a good thing.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's a great message. Annalise?
Sure. So I think I have a picture too. And this shows sort of the evolution of a PLL in Santa Ana. So as I said, we did the Bags of Stuff activity on Zoom. And so what you can see in panel A is a couple of parents had ideas about incorporating something like a spinning wheel. They just knew that their kids would love to spin something. They wanted it to be very engaging and have some, colorful components to it. And we heard stories from families in our co-design sessions about different games that they like to play with their kids. And one of those games was a popular game amongst the Spanish-speaking community called Loteria. And so we took this information, so we were inspired by this game that they play and also this spinning wheel idea, and we recreated Loteria as a PLL. And so you can see that in panel D. So what we're going to be creating is a freestanding structure in the park where kiddos and their parents will be able to spin this wheel. Loteria is kind of like bingo. So they'll spin the wheel, they'll get an icon, and then they'll flip one of the icons over on their card. And on the back of the card is a STEM-based prompt that asks them to do something like count how many triangles you see in your, in the area around you, or see who can jump the highest. And so we actually designed those STEM prompts with families as well. And the process of this included, again, going to families with these renderings, like panel D's showing, asking for feedback on that, and then having a big play test session where we had them actually play with the life-size mock-up of this and give us feedback on that. And I think this shows pretty nicely how we've taken some of those ideas and tried to make it reflected in the PLL that we created.
Wonderful. Thank you all. So before we move to Q&A, which we're going to do here in a moment, I'm going to ask you each one final question. If you can answer in like 10 to 20 seconds or less, what is one final thought or lesson learned about the importance of engaging communities in this process? And while you think for a brief moment about your answer, if you would like to ask any questions, particularly for our virtual audience, please tweet your questions to @BrookingsMetro and use the hashtag Playful Learning Landscapes, or you can email events@brookings.edu and we'll have somebody in the room to read them out for you. So, okay, final thoughts. Catherine, you want to kick us off?
Sure. So my final thought is, basically we're now working on 2 other playground builds, and we're using this exact same method that we used for Highland Park. And honestly, in speaking with our landscape architect, it was the first time that we really did this level of engaging young people in the design process and just in the conversation in general. So we are using the same materials. We're putting together a very similar outline of, letting people design in the playground, wanting to connect it with something that people will remember and can have identity with for the long run, like that mosaic. And putting together committees of local stakeholders who help us with the community engagement piece. I think one thing that I've learned is, specifically working in city government, we have to work with the community, and some of that is the community holding us accountable to making sure that the end result of things like our play spaces and anything that we're really doing to impact community is representative of what community actually wants. So moving forward, we are taking this model of how we've worked together on this particular design, and we're using that in the future. And I think that's a big win for us. We had a couple of people who were maybe, that's a lot of time. You get that in city government sometimes. So I think because we have some people who are really energized about this work, it's starting to change that pushback that we would get to something like a colorful crosswalk, for example, which is our next thing we're trying to do. Doesn't sound challenging, but it can be. That said, I think we're getting enough people within the community and within the city that want to see more community engagement and more community-based design.
All right, Annalise, final thought.
Sounds good. So I'm going to end this with something that a parent told us in one of our co-design sessions. She said that working with us allowed her to feel like a kid again. And I just think that was a really inspiring thing that someone told us that highlights the importance of not just like going to communities to engage with them, but also to bring what we're what we're all about to them too. So we're all about playful learning, and I think we can engage kids, families, adults, everybody throughout the whole process in that way.
Fabulous. Valerie, final thought.
So my final thought would be to always be curious. I think there's so much that we can learn if we just take the time to listen and be curious and that includes all of our stakeholders, our parents, our children, our funders and partners.
Wonderful. Thank you all. So questions for the panel. And we have some that were submitted in advance and some coming in from the virtual audience, but we'll start with one in the room. Emily.
Hi, thank you. Hi, I'm Emily Samos, working with the Learning Agenda. And so this was amazing. So thank you so much for your comments. And so what I wanted to hear, though, is a little bit like, here you are running a Parks and Rec department or a researcher. But so the very beginning, you're like, we want to build these new play spaces in parks. How do you get those parents? Like, what's the very beginning point? Like, what are you doing to actually get those parents in these beautiful pictures to participate from the get-go?
I'll say for us, it's definitely our community partners. We'll often go to partners first at the very beginning of a project. So our landscape architect has a direct connection with the executive director of Trying Together. And then there's two additional staff members who were part of this specific process that are out in the community. We'll typically bring partners together first. We also go to our council members to talk about which community organizations we may not already know mean a lot to that particular neighborhood. So in Highland Park, we had the Highland Park Community Council, but there's also other community organizations that weren't necessarily on our radar, which we were able to bring in. And then, as I mentioned with COVID, we developed this thing called Engage PGH. And I think we've done a pretty okay job making sure people know about it, but the concept was that even if you weren't able to be part of the Zoom meeting or part of the design process at a certain point, you can go on that website and type in Highland Park Super Playground, and you'll see every step that we've taken, every meeting, everything is there for the community to have access to. But our first place is our partners, for sure.
Yeah, and to jump in here too, same for us. So having developed a partnership with SAILI, which is an organization that interfaces with families in the Santa Ana community, was very important. So we, talked with those community leaders who were able to reach out to families in the community that they thought would be interested, that they thought would want to come and participate in this. And so that was really instrumental in getting families into our process.
I'll close it out. We are a partner. So I think for us, it was a great opportunity to connect with philanthropists and to really, to Catherine's point, work from the bottom up. And so I have the pleasure to work with some really great parent leaders, and we are also connected to our CPS, our Chicago Public Schools in the community, our child care providers, center-based providers. And so we have such a great pool of families to engage with that I think starting with partners just makes sense because they know, especially for playful learning, we need stewards to really help us spread the word about these spaces. So engaging with different partners through an anchor organization, I think, is really helpful.
Partners coming through strong again. Do we have any virtual questions? I can take one from advance. Okay, so David in advance asked, who facilitates playful learning space activities and how are they compensated? So do you have any activity facilitators at your Playful Learning Landscape sites?
So I'll just mention, I mentioned the story time that we're going to build in, and that's just one of how we want to use this particular play space moving forward. Our partner is working with us on that. We've also done at other locations like our rec centers and other places in the park, especially throughout the pandemic. We've done story time that our community officers, police officers will come in. And it's so funny, I actually went to the first one we did, and the officer was awesome. She was like so engaging. And I'm like, she's like, oh, I used to be an educator before I became an officer. I was like, that totally shows. We need you at every single book reading that we do. So we also pull with our internal resources. We'll have our staff involved from the Parks and Rec department to help out. But in this case, we're building it now. We don't have Outside of park rangers, which do naturalist education in our parks, the city doesn't have additional staff out in our play spaces, but I know Philadelphia has that model. I've been looking at it for a long time and talking about it because I think it's very cool. We have an opportunity locally where we employ young people in the summertime, and I think that could be like a good model to bring to our play space.
So I would not answer the first part of that question because we haven't yet installed our PLLs in Santa Ana, but to get to the second part, just to mention that we did compensate all of our families for their time. So we made sure that they had, again, space to tell us about their values, to have an engaging interaction with us, but also we are acknowledged that that time is very valuable, so we made sure to compensate along the way for that.
And for us, I think absolutely we compensated our families for their time in the design process. As far as facilitating, the idea is that the community is already gathering there. So we don't necessarily facilitate in the formal sense, but throughout the summer we'll have outreach activities where we just naturally will play with kids, and so we'll go to those sidewalk installations or we'll go to the laundromat because as I think across the country we've seen a decline in enrollment in so many of our early learning programs. So it's really thinking about how do we leverage these spaces and use that as an opportunity to really engage with our community and not only playful learning but to talk to them about other resources.
Wonderful. So unfortunately, we are out of time, but I want to thank Valerie and Annalise and Catherine for their wonderful insights, and I think it's very obvious that they have all engaged with their communities with such intentionality, and I hope that there are nuggets of these processes that we can all take back into our work in our own respective communities. So with that, we are going to transition to our second panel titled Measuring the Impact of Playful Learning Sites, moderated by Jennifer Vey.
Musical chairs. All right, good morning, everyone. I'm Jennifer Vey. I'm a senior fellow with Brookings Metro, and I'm also the director of the Ann T. and Robert M. Bass Center for Transformative Placemaking, also with Brookings Metro. And that was a great panel. I think we have some bars been set very high, folks, but I'm confident that we're going to really get into a great discussion today about measuring the impact of playful learning landscapes. So I have with me today a stellar panel of Chris DeStassi from Interface Studio, Dr. Danielle Ekrobani from Children's Hospital Philadelphia, and Brenna Hassinger-Das from Pace University. So, of course, we just spent a lot of time talking about community engagement. You got to see a lot of great examples of playful learning landscapes that are happening in communities across the country. We're going to pivot a little bit to talk about how do we really evaluate playful learning landscapes so that we know if these kind of installations are meeting some of their intended goals, for example, and so that we can communicate some of that impact in order to really be able to garner more investment into these spaces, which we know are so important to our communities. So, in fact, about a year ago, Playful Learning Landscapes at Brookings put out a brief just on this subject. It really tried to offer a framework for how we think about those varied impacts of playful learning landscapes and provide some guidance for how we might go about doing this kind of evaluation work that's really so important. So we're going to delve into that with our panel today, really focusing on kind of the why, the what, and the how of measurement and evaluation of playful learning landscapes, installations, and sites. Really what we want to try to get at is kind of what are those tools? What are, how do we really go about this to really understand how playful learning landscapes is increasing child development and those child-caregiver interactions, but also, how does this really influence and improve the public realm? How does it improve social interaction, even among adults? And then ultimately, really, how does this help with community cohesion? So we're going to get started. I'm going to actually have each of the panelists introduce themselves and just tell us a little bit about the work that you do. So we'll start here with Chris.
Sure, thank you. So I'm Chris DeStassi. I work with Interface Studio. We're a planning and urban design firm out of Philadelphia. And we're a part of Reimagining the Civic Commons. So Reimagining the Civic Commons is a national initiative started about 6 years ago with about, I think, 5 cities. Now it's up to 12. And the goal of the Reimagining the Civic Commons initiatives is to bring more investment to our public spaces across the country, with the goal of sort of lessening the social isolation that so many communities experience, lessening economic segregation and distrust among community members. So really using public space investments as a way to advance some really broad social goals. And so Interface has been involved because we've designed and helped manage the data collection across all Civic Commons cities. So designing a data collection methodology that can be implemented in all 12 of these cities across the country to sort of demonstrate the impact of these public space investments.
Fantastic. Danielle.
Good morning, everyone. I'm Dr. Danielle Arcaboni. I am a general pediatrician at Children's Hospital of Philadelphia. I am here to talk to you today about Picture This, which I have the fantastic fortune of being part of a team of a hospital administrator and a child life specialist. Together, we have, through the support of William Penn Foundation, been able to raise up a intervention in what started as primary care spaces, now scaling throughout a variety of different healthcare spaces, to begin to engage families, to help to ease the wait time at hospital spaces in general. What started, I think, from a hospital interest of making families less stressed, more happy while they wait, improve scores. From a healthcare standpoint, we've really been able to kind of shift the dialogue and get hospitals interested in what it means to engage families in a playful way while waiting, which has been a very much a dialogue shift. I think it falls on the heels. I also sit on the executive side of Reach Out and Read, which is another avenue where we engage families in a primary prevention, playful way around early literacy and learning. And so we've learned a lot from that space, but also taken the framework that I've learned from so many of my colleagues here to begin to shift it into playful learning, which has just been fantastic.
Great, Brenna.
Hi. Brenna Hassinger-Doss. I'm an assistant professor in the psychology department at Pace University, which is located in New York City. I'm also a science advisor with the Playful Learning Landscapes Action Network. And a big thread of my work through PLAN, and kind of before there was PLAN, was looking at playful learning installations in public spaces and thinking a lot about measurement. How do we capture what kids are doing, what caregivers are doing? How can we then translate that kind of information into something that might be interesting to funders, policymakers, et cetera? So today I'm going to talk to you a bit about a number of different projects I've been involved in, and what we've kind of done through that to figure out how to best measure playful learning.
Great. So Brenna, I'm actually going to take it back to you because you touched on this a little bit. So I want to talk a little bit about why we measure. It's important, obviously, to do this kind of work to really understand what's happening with playful learning landscapes, and basically, why is it important to evaluate, and how are you actually using this information in your work?
Yeah, I think it's really important in one way, simply for us or for those people who are designing, and I also have done a lot of work designing with communities, and I think, one core thing about why we evaluate is just so that people know what's happening in the space. And, we created this, what came from it, right? But I think another piece is what I mentioned before, that, a lot of times policymakers or funders are really interested in knowing, does it work, right? How effective is it? If I'm going to, put a lot of money, time, and effort into creating this space, are people using it? Are they using it in the way that it's intended to be used? et cetera. So I think there's a lot of different ways in which evaluation can, inform us about effectiveness, but also things like, are people having fun in the space? Are they, using it in new and creative ways that maybe we didn't even think of? So trying to figure out how do you measure all of those pieces, right, I think is really important, and it can give us lots of different levels of information.
Danielle, what does that why look like for you?
Yeah, I think I follow along with where Brenna was going. For us, we are moving into a space that doesn't always belong to the group that's coming in to do it, right? It belongs to families, it belongs to the providers that work there, to the clinical staff and the relationships they have with patients. And so understanding, I think, first and foremost about the acceptability of this new installation, new intervention in this space was first and foremost. I think then pivoting as faculty at the Policy Lab at CHOP, I think that working and being able to translate this into something that really meant something to those on the periphery and on the outskirts, policymakers and others, to be able to scale the work, to be able to bring it to more, then we wanted to look for metrics that really kind of raised that bar, that meant something in terms of what that means downstream for families. And so I see it as a grade 2 scale for sure.
Yep, and Chris, you all are involved in so many of these sites, as you said. So, what has really been the purpose? What's that why for you behind why you've spent so much time and effort developing the metric systems and the tools that you have?
Yeah, absolutely. So I think there's a few different reasons RCC measures. One, of course, is to help cities iterate, right, to understand the impact of their investments, whether it's working. On the other hand, I think from the beginning, RCC saw that in order to make the argument that transformative public space investments could impact things like social cohesion, like civic engagement in these communities, that they really needed the data to back those things up. And so from the very beginning, they sort of baked into this program the idea that we need to collect data on how these public spaces are performing, how they're impacting the communities in which they're located, in order to make that case to policymakers, to funders, that these investments are worthwhile. Yeah.
That's great. So I think what you've all really touched on is sort of there's some threads here, right, around you need to evaluate one so you know if they're meeting your goals and to be able to iterate in that process. But also we need to show that this works. If we want to get additional investment, if we know it works, we have to let others know too, and that's really then important to be able to prove it with the data. So I want to pivot a little bit to go from the why to the what. So there's so many different ways that we can be measuring playful learning landscapes and so many different impacts that they can have on communities. So I want to talk to each of you a little bit about what that looks like, because I think for some of us it's a little more narrow, and for some, I think Chris particularly, it's pretty expansive. So I want to start with Brenna again around what are the kind of things you're looking for when you're doing this evaluation of PLL sites?
Yeah, I think that's a really great question, and it's actually something that's kind of shifted over time. So starting out, one of the first things was really just, we're doing naturalistic observation, so watching people use these sites that are in public spaces. So, okay, if that's what I'm gonna do, then what can I capture in a naturalistic observation? So I'm not filming, I can't watch it over again. What can I capture in a short period of time? And if I'm capturing a one visit, I'm not gonna be able to capture like child outcomes like way down the road, right? I need to see what's happening. So we know from research that caregiver-child interactions are so important for child development in a variety of areas, like language development for one thing. And so we decided to focus on caregiver-child interactions at sites and looking at areas that were relevant to the designs themselves. So the designs created, based in the science of learning, things we know about how kids learn literacy, math skills, spatial skills. So we wanted to look, okay, are caregivers and kids talking about math? Are they talking about spatial skills? Are they talking about like literacy related stuff like sounding out words or doing other things like that. So we look for those in observations. We also look for like how many back and forth conversations are caregivers and kids having, and just other elements about their interaction in the space. And then of course, like what parts of installations are they using? So what things are kind of like more popular? Maybe if we have like 4 different installations, which ones are they gravitating towards? So we really kind of started from that place. And a lot of the projects that I've been involved in, when I'm leading evaluation, I try to keep a lot of the indicators very similar. So we have been able to compare across a variety of projects, which I think is important. But kind of moving forward, I feel like we're moving into a little bit of a new arena for some of this stuff. So my colleague Jennifer Zosh and I are going to be leading a new evaluation for an upcoming project. And one of our big foci on that is actually looking at community belonging, community engagement around the community pieces that have been important, like you heard in the previous panel. But we're going to be looking at people involved in this project and really trying to focus in on some of those variables that I have not collected as much data about in the past, while also continuing to collect data about caregiver-child interaction. So I think as these projects have evolved and we've moved several years down the line, we're really sort of trying to hone in on other areas that are important. And I think this next phase is really focusing on like so these projects work. I've done some work around comparing multiple projects. We know that it works for the caregiver-child interaction. What other things can it do? And can it do this kind of like increasing senses of community belonging, engagement, and now we want to see, okay, that's like our next step. So that's kind of where we're going.
That's fantastic. Danielle, so your picture this effort is kind of, it works in a very particular kind of space, right? So a lot of the playful learning, activities and installations that you saw earlier on the panel, or even that you experienced a little bit this morning, are sort of in the public realm, or at least in even private spaces like a laundromat, where people that are public in the sense that people are spending time in them. You're focused more in the healthcare realm. And, so within those spaces, what are the kind of impacts that you've hoped to have? And then how are you actually been measuring those to understand if what you're trying to do is effective? And then how is that, Brenna got into how it's evolved over time. How is that, what does that evolution look like for the work that you're doing?
Absolutely. So I think I'll try to approach each of those questions maybe in the succession of how the picture this story evolved. We started in waiting rooms, large medical waiting rooms. And if anyone has been in a medical space in the last, 2.5 years or so, there's not so many people in those spaces anymore. At least we try really hard for there not to be. So what started as a mural that was about 9 foot by 10 foot in several large waiting rooms, looking at dense murals and how folks interacted with them, and sitting back and doing naturalistic observations, very much akin to what Brenna described, we had to take a pause and a pivot. Fortunately, before we had to do that, we were able to hear back from families what went really well and what perhaps we needed to shift a little bit. What we learned from families was they know how to ask questions around the murals. I loved the first panel. We talked about murals and folks engaging. That was fantastic. We learned that by putting certain elements in the murals, spacing them out appropriately, putting things and studying where they went, we were able to trigger more conversation and how. So we did a bit of an iterative process. We shifted the mural slightly. We expanded things out. We shrunk them down to be above exam room tables. And so in pediatrics, lots of kids sit on the exam room table while they wait. And so we're able to get kids right up close with the murals. They don't need to be very dense. They can be these big scenes. So what's now in about 3 foot by 4 foot, we're able to get more content in less space, not scaffolded as much as we were before, because what we learned was if we put certain things in the murals, they will build the experience themselves. So we measured the content of language. We measured conversational turns, those back and forth conversations. And what we found was, compared to standard waiting rooms, when the mural was in place, folks had more conversational turns. And that was not just standard waiting rooms without anything devoid on the walls. It was also waiting rooms with play spaces involved, ones where you could climb on things and things like that. What we saw was they facilitated beautiful play for kids. Kids were up and moving, but what their parents were doing was sitting on their cell phones back on their chairs. And honestly, I'm a parent of young kids. I do that myself in those particular spaces. So, but by putting these murals on the wall, we were able to create those conversational turns back and forth. What we dream for next is very similar to where Brenna was going, was we are seeing, okay, we're creating a space that creates conversation, promotes calm, and a sense of engagement while we wait. What does that do for the medical space? If anyone's kind of listened to anything over the course of the last 2.5 years, the medical space has really been one that's been impacted in terms of its trust, in terms of its ability of parents to really say, I want to invest in this provider in my child's healthcare. And we know that general health impacts so much that comes downstream. So if we can do a simple intervention on the wall that creates a sense of trust, creates a sense of belonging, and that this healthcare space is really investing in your child, we really would love to see that that turns the conversation a little bit for where healthcare has gone.
Great. So Chris, you all have done so much work in so many different kinds of work in different kinds of spaces. So can you talk to us a little bit about, the kinds of things you're measuring, which I know is pretty expansive?
Yeah, no, definitely very expansive. The Civic Commons is focused on sort of 4 big, broad outcomes. Civic engagement, the idea that public spaces can bring communities together, inspire greater stewardship and advocacy among community members. Socioeconomic mixing, that these spaces and work in them can help create connections across social classes and income groups. Environmental sustainability, not only that the spaces themselves can improve the environmental functioning of communities, but that they can encourage more sustainable behaviors like biking and walking around the neighborhood. And then lastly, value creation, that work in these spaces can help create value for local communities, whether it be jobs, entrepreneurship opportunities, real estate value for the communities that already call those spaces their own, that call those communities home. So yes, the outcomes are very broad for Civic Commons. Over time, it's sort of evolved. In the very beginning, with the first 5 Civic Commons cities, we were providing very intense on-the-ground hand-holding on how to implement these data collection tools. But as time has gone on and more cities have come into the network, we've focused a lot more on producing sort of DIY tools, as we say, sort of providing our tools online so anybody can pick them up and use them and implement them in their own cities. And if necessary, we're always there to help a little bit, but really the goal is that folks can pick these things up and collect data that can help show progress on their own.
Can you just give one example of, say, in the environmental sustainability, you mentioned that. So in terms of the kind of data that you're actually collecting, can you just give us a few examples of that?
Sure. So environmental sustainability is interesting. I think some of the data in there relates to local practices. So there's a whole slew of different tools we use, one of which is a neighborhood survey, in which ideally we're doing a door-to-door neighborhood survey of residents, although that's not always possible. But and one of the things we're asking folks about is how they get to work, how they travel to the park. We also do an intercept survey in the park, so we're asking how you got here today. And we're doing those things in year 0, before any investments have actually happened, and then in year 3 and year 6, and tracking change over time. So whether that has to do with environmental sustainability or things like public life, where we're doing those sort of on-the-ground user counts of how many people are in the space, what are they doing, what are the demographics of the folks in the space, when we do surveys of those folks, what are their income levels, so we can actually track, are we attracting a group of people that's representative of the community?
Great. So I think what we're gathering here is this is pretty intense work, right? It takes, if you're going to do this kind of evaluation and measurement and do it well, it takes some time, and I'm sure that there's some challenges involved. So we're going to try to do a little audience participation exercise, if you would all be so willing to indulge us. For those of you online, we're gonna focus on the room. I'll let you know what's happening, but you be thinking about the answers as well. So I actually, prior to today, asked each of the panelists what if they could really identify what kind of one of their single biggest challenges are. What does that look like? So I'm going to ask each of you whether it's one of these four things: money, to hire evaluators, for example, or to actually do the data work, the compilation; building trust among the families that might be being observed in these spaces; effectiveness, making sure that you're measuring the right things in the right ways; or communicating the results outward. So how many of you think that the biggest challenge is money? Show of hands. Okay. How about building trust among families being observed? Ooh, oh, okay, well, for those of you online, pretty overwhelming response. Don't know how many of you might have been thinking the same thing. Effectiveness, just knowing what to measure, measuring the right things in the right way. Okay, few hands there. And how about the communication piece, making sure that your work is being communicated effectively? All right. Okay, so the building trust, overwhelming, and then almost a tie maybe between effectiveness and communicating. So let's go to our panelists. This time, let's start with Danielle. Danielle, you said effectiveness. You want to talk a little bit about that?
Absolutely. I love hearing from those around me and from the panel that came before me. I feel sometimes in the space that we're in a space that is semi-private, right? That the challenge of kind of measuring what families are really feeling in that space and making assertions that make sense, that we're not just going in and saying, hey, we did a focus group with 40 families, or we surveyed 100 families and this is what we found. There's so much diversity in the families that we serve. Each family comes in with a unique experience. And so to scale work, to move work forward in a way that is meaningful and measuring that in an effective way that meets each of those needs from where we started in terms of the families, in terms of, in our case, the medical providers and staff, and then in terms of having content that's meaningful for scale, I've found is one that is truly a challenge. Now, I think it's scaffolded by all of the other challenges. I'm not gonna lie there. Everything kind of plays together. But that's what I would say is kind of first and foremost in our realm.
Yep. So, Chris, you said communicating.
I did, yeah. But I did want to mention the trust one too, because I think that's something that we encounter in every city we work in every city where we, come to try to help them implement some data analysis. And what we learned really quickly was that it works a lot better if we think of the data collection not just as data collection, but also as community engagement and as an opportunity to bring some really deeply involved community members into the data collection process, to compensate them for their time, to use them as data collectors, and then they work with them to co-create the data collection process. And then those people often become the greatest advocates for the project because they're so deeply involved and they can see the impact that it has with the numbers. When it comes to communicating it, I think what is tough is this idea that the data in and of itself is not convincing. Data is just one part of the task of telling a story about the impact of your investment. And we sometimes say, it's a three-legged stool. You have your data, you have some sort of imagery, whether it's videos or photos of the kids playing and it all really working and coming together, and a story from a resident, a local person, a quotation. So you have your data point, your story, and your photo, and that data is really just one part of that you need to knit it all together as a story.
That was great. And actually, this is a great pivot point because I'm going to ask Brenna to talk a little bit about, she said money was part of the challenge, finding the resources, finding the staff and being able to hire people to do the work. But I also, because Chris brought it up as well, we're going to quickly pivot to the how part of the conversation, which is how do you go about this? And I want to talk particularly about this piece of engaging community residents, because I know you've done that in your work. So if you could talk a little bit about the money and then talk a little bit about how you've engaged community residents in these last couple of minutes here.
So yeah, I said money. No one has said money. But I feel like money for me, well, to be fair, Jennifer, I said all of them. And then I was like, if I had to pick, okay, money. But I feel, I said money because it ties into what Jennifer asked me to speak to second, is the community engagement part. Because a big focus of what I do is hiring community members to collect data. So that's why money is very important, because I want to make sure that I have enough money to compensate community members who are working as data collectors, who are, just taking part in a lot of different facets of the project, like you heard about in the first panel, talking about compensating families who take part in like community engagement activities or focus groups or other things like that. So that's why I think money is important, because it can then help to be able to have great community engagement and have community members feel like they are integral parts of a team and a project. So that's something that I've done on a number of projects. And as I kind of mentioned before, I have kind of undertaken this like meta-analysis of the PLAN projects that have existed so far. And one of the sort of sub-analyses that I did was looking at the effects of community engagement on projects. And what I found was that the ones that had community involvement were the most effective out of all of the projects. So that just reinforced this idea of how important it is that community members are involved at all levels of the project. So from design, co-creation, through coming up with data, like what are we going to measure? And that's something that has been newer for me. So I did a project that actually got interrupted by COVID big time. I was working with United for Brownsville, which is a group focused on early childhood in Brownsville, Brooklyn. And I worked with community members to actually, they helped design data collection. So like I talked with them about what do you even want to measure on this. It was a supermarket speak project. And, they were very focused on things like healthy eating, which we hadn't really assessed before in some of these projects. So we added, ways to examine our families talking about healthy eating. So I think that, having community members involved in that project and then involved in the actual data collection, doing observations, doing surveys, doing other things like that has been really important. And moving forward, in the upcoming projects I mentioned about community belonging, engagement. So some of that measurement is going to be with community members through things like focus groups and other activities, but some is going to be with people who are going to be employed working at projects as sort of like part of the project team, and then talking with them about how their experiences working on a playful learning project like this affects their community belonging and engagement. So just having community involvement at kind of like all levels, and it's, it's not perfect, and I've learned a lot through this process of working with different community partners, trial and error, a lot of things like that. But I think, as moving forward, really trying to like ramp up the community engagement so that we've got community at all levels. And I think that, in the measurement side, that's where, like I said, the money can like really come into play, because I think we really just need to show, good faith to say community members, like this is a lot of work. This is something that you might not have ever experienced before. So I've been doing things like working with my institutional review board at my university to streamline training processes so that people can get on board without having to do a lot of onerous things if they don't have computer access, and just trying to, streamline this process and think a lot about what does it look like to include community members in data collection.
That's great. That was a great way to kind of knit together our whole discussion today. So we're coming close to time, and I want to make sure that Kathy gets a chance to come up here and have the last word. So I know some of you might have questions, but because we are kind of pushing on time, I'm sure that our panelists would be happy to stick around a little bit here at the end and chat with all of you individually. So for now, I'm going to call Kathy up to the stage.
To see the people in this room and to hear these panels, and I just want to say thank you. For me, today was a total wow. I then want to ask you all to imagine. Imagine what it would be like if every city, every village, and every neighborhood was really family and child friendly. Can we even imagine that? And then I want you to imagine what it would be like if we could imbue these neighborhoods and cities and morph the everyday spaces that we have into places that were socially engaging and that allowed for the kind of mental gymnastics that helped every child grow. It seems to me that on the panels today, we actually saw that. We saw that in spades in cities like Philadelphia, in cities like Pittsburgh, in Chicago, in Santa Ana, and in so many more that we're all working in and working with right now. And to knit these together into a community, Jen, at Brookings has been absolutely thrilling as we shared all of the ideas together. I think we also saw how the three-part equation really works. And Brenna, thanks for that last comment, because I think our attempt to really do community engagement and to have community voices also brings with it community agency. It means that we're not building things for a community, another playground that we're dropping here. We're working with our neighbors so that what we do reflects their values and what's meaningful to them. And that ends up in the final bills. How exciting is that? And then we find that when we use those voices and we overlay what we know in the science of learning, that these become active and engaging spaces. They become meaningful for the first time. They become socially interactive and build the kind of belonging that Brenna just told us works so well to actually give us effectiveness when we do measure things. And then to think about what is it that we want our children and families to know in each community. And that's where the 6 C's becomes the last part of the overlay, because we want people who have relationships with one another. We want to rebuild that, especially after COVID. We need people who are good communicators. We need people who know content, and we can put the STEM in. We can put the social interaction in. We can put the social emotional skills in. We can drop in anything once we know the palette of skills that we know people need at this point in time in the 21st century. So it's a 3-part equation: community, the how of learning, and the what of learning. And I should say that none of this would have been possible without all the wonderful people you've already seen who were on these panels today, and my long-term collaborator, Roberta Galenkoff, who's here today, who was, really, we were a team in developing all of this. And so I want you to imagine, as we close today, what it would be like if we created a new public square. Somewhere along the line, it feels to me like in communities far abroad and at home, we lost the public square. We lost the piazza. I think it's time to reinvent it, and to reinvent it with purpose. Playful Learning Landscapes. Thank you.
Great. Thanks, everyone.